For the remainder of this presentation, let's take some time to think deeply about some of the challenges surrounding making causal inferences from these statistical techniques that we're using to test causal models. Stone, Romero, and Rasopa wrote an article a while back, and it's cited in the notes below this slide. And they made the proposal that we need to be very careful about mediation testing, because the same pattern of B weights that we would find to support our mediation model that we've hypothesized are the exact same set of B weights that are also consistent with other models that we could test. And so on this slide, I just put 4 additional models. There are many more that could theoretically be proposed. So in scenario 2, for example, we would see the same set of B weights as we would see in scenario 1, which is our proposed model. And let's say we found B weights that were significant with mediation. We tested it via process or Barron and Kenny or whatever method, and we found the results to be consistent with our proposed model in scenario 1. Scenario 2, however, gives an alternative explanation that would yield the exact same B weights that we would see for scenario 1. So how do we know that our scenario 1 is the correct one and not scenario 2? In scenario 3, we have an even different situation where we have this double-headed curved arrow connecting our IV and our mediator. And that just means that 2 variables are correlated with one another, that they don't cause one another. So a one-directional arrow means causality in when we're graphing causal models. And so we know that X causes Y in scenario 3 and that M causes Y, but X and M are just correlated. They're not causing one another. So the pattern of B weights that we would see would be consistent with scenario 3 as well. Scenario 4, same, and scenario 5. So they make the argument in their paper that there's no way we can know from just statistical testing alone, regardless of the great techniques we use with bootstrapping, etc., that we can distinguish which of these models is the correct one. So basically all you can say is that my B weights are consistent with my proposed model, but then they're also consistent with these other 4 or 5 scenarios. And how do I know that those aren't the correct ones? And so I think it is important to think about and just give us a sense of, first of all, humility that we really probably don't know the answer. If we have not done an experimental design, there's no way that we would know that answer. The second thing is if we haven't done an experimental design, we can still use some logic and try to rule out some of these alternative scenarios if we can. So that's another thing that we can do. And just acknowledge very forthrightly in the discussion section that the results are consistent with mediation. However, they're also consistent with another alternative model, but we don't believe this to be the case, that this alternative model is true because of X and Y. And so you know your research, and so you can maybe make that argument. But overall, it's just good to acknowledge the fact that our statistical analyses in no way can determine causality. The only way that we can do that is through proper design, of course, and random assignment and controlled situation, controlled study with manipulation of an independent variable. And so there's a reading for this week where the authors discuss even some challenges with manipulating an IV and a mediator to determine their effects on the DV. So we'll get to that in a bit, but that in general, manipulation, if you can ethically do that, is a much stronger design, and the statistical techniques that we use in no way can make us more confident for making a causal inference from a study that's non-experimental. So anyway, it's just good to keep in mind, and something that you can maybe put in your discussion sections of your 2YP, that if you have a mediation that you haven't been able to manipulate any of the variables, that you can think through some of these scenarios and imagine that someone critiquing your study might say, well, what about scenario 4? And you could at least talk through and give the person an idea of what you can or cannot say from the results of your study.